Hello and welcome back to another recap video. I am James McCool. I am the guy over at paydirt.ghost.io. I run all the models over there and run the site and everything like that. I do these recap videos so that we can keep a good accountability of the models and make sure that things are running correctly, and I'm not just like putting things out there when they're good and not saying anything when they're bad. So we're going to go over all of the models. I think today we had NBA, NHL, and League of Legends slates yesterday, so going to be going over all three of those things. Overall, it was a pretty good night. NBA lagged a little bit. There were some guys that rated really, really well and projected really, really well that ended up just kind of like falling apart or having a kind of middling game. We'll get to those here in a bit. I think that NHL did really well looking at the scores from last night and looking at where the majority of the goals came from. So NHL, I think, worked really well, and League of Legends, I crushed it. I mean, I took second place in the big $12 tournament with just a slight kind of pivot away from some main chalk, but the projections were really good, and I felt really good about them. So going to be going into all that today. We are going to start, as usual, with the NBA matchups model. This is what I refer to as the DEM sheets on the site, defensive efficiency matchup sheets. The top players today or yesterday were Colin Sexton, Evan Fournier, Jaylen Brown, Zion Williamson, and Derek Favors. And of all five of these guys, it was really only Derek Favors that had a less than good game. What I consider a good game is if they come around 5x, like 5x their salary on DraftKings, since that's specifically what I play. I don't play on FanDuel, so a lot of my breakdowns have to do with DraftKings scoring. Colin Sexton, Evan Fournier, Jaylen Brown, and Zion Williamson all put up 25 or more real-life points. Colin Sexton, his line was 25 points, 2 rebounds, and 2 assists. I think that he ended up putting up somewhere around 30.5 fantasy points on DraftKings, which was okay. It wasn't great, but it wasn't going to kill you either. Evan Fournier, 28 points, 2 rebounds, 1 assist, and 2 steals. He had a great game. That equates out to somewhere around like 36, 37 fantasy points. He didn't rate all that well in terms of projections, but he had a really good game against Dallas. Jaylen Brown started out really slow and came up 2 rebounds short of a double-double, but was part of a really strong Boston stack where I think it was 4 different Boston players scored 25 or more real-life points. So Jaylen Brown did well. He didn't quite match Jason Tatum and Gordon Hayward. Gordon Hayward had the best game out of all of the Boston chalk. But Jaylen Brown still had a pretty good game, and he started out really slow. He probably should have had somewhere around 30 and 10. Zion Williamson, 25 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists, and 1 steal. Again, good performance. I think around 36 fantasy points. He was priced appropriately, so that wasn't going to get you anything great. If he gets, a couple more rebounds or maybe a couple blocks, then he ends up being a great play. But definitely got the boost in terms of points. He definitely was really efficient from the 2-point percentage perspective. So definitely like what Zion Williamson was able to do. Kristaps Porzingis, I also want to point out, was on this list and had a phenomenal game. He was somebody who rated well in the range of outcomes and in this matchup sheet, so he was somebody who I was in on. And then for center, Derek Favors, 8 points, 12 rebounds, 1 assist, 2 steals, or 1 steal. If he gets 2 more points, then he probably ends up having an okay game. I don't remember how much he cost on DraftKings, but I think 8 points, 12 rebounds, 1 assist, and 1 steal wasn't going to quite do what you needed him to do. He's usually around 4,500 or 5K. So you probably would have needed those 2 more points, and even then, it's probably a good performance, not a great performance, but he was okay. It was a bit of a letdown for most of the centers that I liked. Derek Favors, Dwight Howard, and Rudy Gobert. Derek Favors had a okay game. Rudy Gobert had an okay performance. And Dwight Howard had a straight-up bad performance. And this is one of those situations where with Dwight Howard, he's on the sheets as having a good matchup, but this good matchup is good because it allows centers to get more rebounds and more assists and get more 3-point percentage than usual. So none of those things are what Dwight Howard does. Dwight Howard is a point scorer and a rebounder, and this was actually a negative matchup for opposing centers in terms of points. So Dwight Howard coming away with this with a less than stellar performance is just one of those contextual things where when you look at the sheet, you kind of got to think to yourself, all right, well, how does this person get their fantasy points? Do they get their fantasy points because of assists? Okay, this is a good matchup for assists. Do they get their fantasy points from taking high efficiency shots down in the paint? Okay, well, then this is probably a bad one for somebody like Dwight Howard. So understanding those kind of like little nuanced things, I wouldn't take them too seriously. I focus a lot more on the fantasy point per minute aspect of it. But it is worth considering those things when you have 1v1 decisions or when you're looking for low-owned plays and stuff like that. It's worth thinking through. So we'll move on to the NBA range of outcomes, which was, again, pretty good. Not bad last night. Only had 2 actually bad performances, and that was Kevin Porter Jr. and Dwight Howard. Dwight Howard, I just went over, it just wasn't really that great of a matchup for him, even though it was a boost to most centers. Anthony Davis certainly got the boost. He ended up putting up 66 fantasy points, even after leaving to go to the locker room for a little while. So, I mean, you can say that the matchup fit him better and that using him was the better idea. And both him and Dwight Howard got the boosts anyway. So, definitely something worth considering there. Then Anthony Davis did get a nice boost. I took all of the top 20 and I went through and found their fantasy points. Kevin Porter only put up 9.25 fantasy points. That was straight up bad. He had a lot of turnovers, he had a lot of fouls, and then he got ejected, actually. So, was this a bad performance because he was having an off game? Yeah, probably. Was it a bad performance because he got kicked? Yeah, probably a little bit of that as well. It goes both ways. It's just all around pretty bad. Jaylen Brown was the top value for the range of outcomes last night on DraftKings. He ended up doing plenty fine, put up 39.5 fantasy points. That's great for 5,900. He was highly owned, of course, so you didn't really gain anything from it, but he had a good performance. Ish Smith, meh performance. Joe Ingles, meh performance. Carmelo Anthony, good performance. Malik Beasley, good performance. The great performances, though, were CJ McCollum, who ended up putting up 50 fantasy points. Again, you're not getting anything from him doing that. He was 50% owned in every tournament. Gordon Hayward had a great performance at 48.25 fantasy points. He was only 7K and was not as highly owned as he should have been, so you definitely gained some equity there. Kristaps Porzingis put up 56.5 fantasy points at, I think, like 2% ownership, 3% ownership or something like that. It was a fantastic play. Him and Anthony Davis right next to each other in the range of outcomes. They both did fantastic. So being able to have Kristaps Porzingis and Anthony Davis, that would have given you a huge leg up on the field. Those were the guys that did great. There were a couple guys that were good. D'Angelo Russell was good, put up 45 fantasy points. Colin Sexton was good, put up 30. Anthony Simmons was very popular, but put up around 20 fantasy points. And Malik Beasley put up 36.5. That was a good performance as well. So range of outcomes over the top 20, it was good for sure. It's just that on a slate like last night, where there's so much chalk just doing super well, it's hard to differentiate and find success. If the chalk fails, then we probably have a better night using the range of outcomes, because the range of outcomes doesn't really care so much about finding those guys that are median optimals. It finds guys who have the best range of possible outcomes, which is why it's called the range of outcomes. But if the chalk doesn't absolutely crush last night, then the range of outcomes looks better than it actually was. Overall, it was good. It was about on par for what I would want to expect from the range of outcomes. We'll move on to hockey now. Hockey was pretty good. Hockey, I'm still kind of getting a feel for what it takes to really have a solid performance in the hockey realm. The New York Islanders were the top first line. They were top line in terms of like line ratings, and Carolina had the top power play rating with their power play 1 unit up against the Rangers. Overall, the Islanders put up 4 goals. The Wild put up 5. The Bruins put up 4. The team that I was like mostly off on was Nashville. I was pretty high on Nashville's power play unit. They had the 4th highest team total, and I didn't think they were going to be popular. They only put up 1 run going into OT against Blackhawks, so that's a bit of a bummer. But overall, I think that having the Islanders as the top stack made sense. It was Jordan Eberle, I think is his name, went off, and if you ended up stacking that first line, he did really well. Or if you ended up stacking the power play unit, he did really well. So definitely happy about the New York Islanders. A couple other things, like go over into the GPP line ranks. The Islanders rated first there again. Chicago rated pretty well. Chicago didn't do all that well. The Bruins, I think, was a miss by me. I mean, they rated pretty well in terms of GPP, and they weren't bad in terms of just like cash rankings, but I didn't have them rated super highly, and they did end up putting up 4 goals. St. Louis GPP line ranks, I didn't have them rated highly at all. They ended up putting up 5 goals. So I don't know. I think that was probably more variance than anything, but it's something worth going back and looking into, especially in a new sport. I don't want to just assume that my model is never going to miss anything and that it's just variance if it does. So I want to go take a look at the St. Louis Blues, look at their rates. Boston, I think, was fine. Islanders did fine. Minnesota Wild ended up putting up 5 goals as well. Up against the Oilers, I didn't have them rated very well either, so that's another one that I'm going to go look at. But also looking at these Vegas totals, like St. Louis is only implied for 2.5, Minnesota is only implied for 2.82. So I think that agreeing with Vegas is more important to me than catching these kind of like variant games, but it's still something that I want to go back and look at. In terms of the ranks, I have these rated by rank right now. Jordan Eberle, like I said, he ended up having a really, really good game. The Islanders, these top 3, those were the ones that I focused the most on. Boston ended up doing well again. So, I mean, David Pastrnak, he's going to rate really well. Of course, he's a good player. Brad Marchand, top 15. So, I think that this was fine. It's just one of those things where I have to continue to build a feeling for it and kind of develop an idea of where to improve things. So if you are a member of the site and you've been playing hockey, I know that you're happy. I've heard a lot of really good feedback, but keep giving the feedback. I need that in order to improve models. So hopefully this did well for everybody last night. I know that it did well for me. I think that it made sense in terms of the Vegas implied totals and the outcomes. Pretty happy about the NHL model over the last week. Last thing that we'll look at is the League of Legends stuff, and League of Legends was a good hit yesterday. Took second place in the $12 tournament. That was nice. I ended up stacking Fnatic and G2 because Fnatic was so cheap. The chalk was G2 and Misfits, and that makes sense. I mean, I had G2 Misfits as the top 2 stacks here, and then Fnatic and OG. Overall, like the projections were great. Caps did fantastic. Perks did fantastic. Jinkos did fantastic. Mix did fantastic. I had B-Voy as my captain, so all of this made sense. The thing about League of Legends, when we are playing it and when we are looking to build for it, it has been a learning experience of really figuring out the best chalk spots to fade. Because League of Legends, if you've read the articles that I have, it's kind of all about winning games and picking winning teams and filling your lineups with winning players. You're not going to win tournaments if you have anybody from a losing team. So it's been kind of trial and error trying to figure out the best ways to leverage the field, but I think I've finally figured it out, and hopefully we can go on a bit of a hot streak here. But yeah, the League of Legends was really, really good. G2 ended up dominating. Misfits ended up winning. Fnatic ended up dominating. So definitely happy about these top 3 teams doing really well. Hopefully we can continue that success. This has been a recap video for all of the accountabilities over at the site. Make sure that you come check things out. There are free memberships and there are subscriber memberships, and just come join the community and have some fun. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you guys later.